gentlemen, welcome to the next episode of the Schmoozin' with Forouzan podcast. Excited. I had the pleasure of meeting our current guest at the Panish, Shea, Boyle, Ravipudi live event. I think it was in Utah. Wonderful time. I got a lot of opportunity to speak with her on the bus from the event to the airport. And I was like, Lord, I'd love to have her on the podcast because she is a gold mine of interesting tidbits. Ladies and gentlemen, Rachel Gezerseh, associate at Panish, Shea, Boyle, Ravipudi. Rachel, how are you?
I'm great, happy and excited to be here, Daniel.
I remember when you first went on stage, I was like, this is the happiest, most energized lawyer I've ever met in my life. I was confused, I was bewildered, and I was curious. You do present in a much more positive sense than most lawyers I meet. Is that just how you naturally are? Something to do with your job?
Right. I I I I don't know if it's how I naturally am. I do think I'm pretty much an optimistic, generally happy person, but
Mm,
I do think it's very much connected to the job that I'm doing now. I think for many, many years as a lawyer, I was not a happy lawyer.
mm.
I joined the plaintiff bar. I put on the white hat, as y'all say, in March of 2020. And really, since that time, I've just felt completely energized and happy and just really like I found my calling, which I never really felt before as a lawyer. So it's just, yeah, it's been an amazing ride, and I'm very, very happy with my choice and with how it's all played out for me.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. So the reason I really wanted you to come on, you have just an interesting background. So, ladies and gentlemen, just to clarify, Rachel worked in defense, big law. At some point, she wrote a book for law students, and throughout that period, she transitioned to plaintiff side, and not just any Joe Schmo plaintiff side. She's working at one of the, if not the best plaintiffs firm in the state. So, as a result, there's a lot to chat about. I myself have had a lot of insurance defense, not experience, but training, and I've had a lot of corporate defense experience. So, I always find the difference between working on defense and working on plaintiff side to be very interesting. So let's just start chronologically. What was it like, especially now that you're a plaintiff's attorney? What was it like back when you were doing defense?
Yeah, and just to go even a little bit further back from that, so I went to Southwestern Law School here in Los Angeles, actually in Koreatown in Los Angeles. And, I had a great experience at Southwestern, but one of the things I always had a chip on my shoulder there um, about big law. Like I initially came in and was like told you'll never get into big law, and just being told that was like, what? Oh, okay, yes, I will. Challenge accepted. I'm getting into big law. And so my entire career there at Southwestern was spent trying to find every way I could by hook or by crook to try to get one of those treasured jobs that you hear about when you go to law school, right? To without much education about what it really was. It was just more like the golden ticket, I'm going to get this, right? And it was very hard coming from that school to actually get those opportunities. Not a lot of those firms would come and even interview us. I had to basically create that opportunity for myself, and I did. And I got this amazing job at Jones Day. That was the firm that I worked at
Okay.
for over a decade, actually. And so initially, when I started there, I had an axe to grind. I really wanted to do well because I had that chip on my shoulder coming from a lower ranked school. And I had a very successful career there, actually, initially. I got put on big trial teams. I was doing I don't know if you're familiar, but the Yamaha Rhino rollover cases, which were, they're ATVs basically that were, there were hundreds filed all over the country. And our firm was tasked with doing the defense on the initial big cases that were going to come up, the bellwether cases. So
Mhm.
my first trial was actually one of those Yamaha cases, and it was an amazing experience. I got to do depots, which you don't get in big law. Not as a first year, not as a second year, maybe not even as a third year do you get those opportunities, but I did. And I got to see and actually work with and against really, really good plaintiff firms on the other side. So I got a real taste of what it meant to be a trial attorney, even in big law, as an early junior associate. So that was great.
Okay. And so if I was to say to you, the biggest difference from your perspective now, on the plaintiff side? The biggest difference between, hey, I'm doing plaintiff's work now, back when I did defense, it was, what is it? What's that like?
That's a loaded question for me because,
Okay.
as a junior, and it comes from the different as you get more senior, my perspective on this changed, right? Because as a junior attorney, you're just excited to get the experience. You're excited to get the deposition. You're excited to get to go argue something in court or draft a really big motion. That's really exciting and very fulfilling, and you're learning. And one thing about Jones Day that was so great was their training of their young associates was just exemplary. It was so great because not only did I get these opportunities, they would also do these hands-on depot training, motions training, boots on the ground, like how to do a hearing. And they would fly us around to different offices, and we would get really, really good. We were just really well trained too, right? The problem, at least what happened to me in big law, was as I became more and more senior, those opportunities and those big trials kind of went away. And
Hmm.
I was then now working more and more on document review projects. And that's just what happened in my career. I was now no longer getting that hands-on sort of boots on the ground experience on cases that mattered to me. I was more working on these big, massive sort of corporate cases, reviewing documents and having responsibility to do that, but not really. I just wasn't fulfilled as a person, as an attorney. I had no connection with the client. I had no, a big thing about me was before I went to law school, I was a documentary filmmaker. That was my pre-lawyer career, and you know, I'm a storyteller. I've learned that about myself. I have to be able to connect to that creativity and that storytelling in what I do on a daily basis, and I was no longer doing them. So, that was my experience as a defense attorney is by the time I was in my 10th year of practice, I was no longer doing anything that I had any connection to. So the work itself, arguably, was similar, I guess, if you're writing motions or taking depositions or doing things like that, but I wasn't even doing that anymore as a defense attorney. So I was pretty miserable, especially
Oh,
as
go
I
ahead.
got more senior.
Yeah, so I'm a little confused. It sounds like you started out with hands-on trial depots, and then you're doing in your senior years doc review. Doesn't it usually go the other way around?
Yeah, you would think. And a lot of it, some of it, and I would never, my experience, and I just want to say this, my experience at Jones Day was incredibly positive. Just overall, I had both my kids when I was there. I never felt that I was, pushed out of opportunities because I was a mom or because I was a woman. There's been litigation around that there, and that was not my experience there. I was treated really well. I loved everyone that I worked with in that LA office in Jones Day. um, I just think that I was a torts attorney. It was the business and tort litigation group that I was in. A lot of that work just it changed. And I think that the opportunities in those kinds of cases, they just weren't there anymore. But what was there was these massive document review projects. And so, that's just kind of what happens. You go with the flow of the work, right? And you don't have that much control over what you're doing, or at least that's how I felt. I felt very powerless, right? And I don't think that that was the firm's fault or my fault. It's just kind of the way it worked out, right? So by the end there, that's what it was. I just didn't feel, and I had friends who were there who thrived, who were doing really well and were just, going up the ranks and having, and they're still there, lifers, right? And I realized at a certain point that I was going to have to make a switch in my career. I was going to have to do something else because I was no longer, this was not going to be a long-term plan for me, right? So what happened was and I'll get to the book in a second, but what I thought was, well, maybe if I'm in a smaller environment, litigation environment, and I have more control over my cases, I'll be a happier lawyer, right? So I joined up with a couple of my friends, also Jones Day refugees, who had started a boutique firm, and I joined up as a partner in their firm in Los Angeles, and I worked there for a couple years, and I was just as miserable. So even though I was running cases, I was taking depots, I was doing all this, and the work, and to your question, the work is the same, right? You're taking depots, you're writing motions, you're going to court, you're doing all that stuff. but there was a core element missing to me as a defense attorney, and that was this storytelling creative piece. Now, I'm sure my very good friends who are defense attorneys would call me out and say, "Of course we're creative, Rachel. Of course they are." But for me, that advocacy, the thing that I love now that I connect so much to in the work that I do at the Panish firm, was absolutely not there. I just did not I wasn't able to tap in and tap into the skills that I get to tap in now on a daily basis, even at the smaller place.
When did you start writing your book?
Right. So what happened was, and the reason why I sort of framed it, talk about Southwestern. So I had always, ever since I got that big law job, people would reach out to me at Jones Day all the time. Students, how did you do it? How did you go from a school like Southwestern and get
Mm.
this marquee job at a marquee firm without OCI or anything like that? How did you do it? And I started actually speaking, like I would go on panels and I would speak to law students. I would go to pre-law groups and speak to pre-law students who were trying to figure out what school, should I go to Southwestern? Are there any opportunities for me? And as I did that, I grew a network of mentees, basically, many of whom who would tell me, Rachel, I wish you would just stand on my shoulder and tell me what to do. I wish you would tell, because I have this hustle mentality, right? I always tell people, even if there aren't pathways in place, there's no OCI, there's no career services telling you it's possible, you can make this possible. You can go after and do whatever you want to do. That's sort of my mantra in life, is just make it happen. Do what you need to do. Be a hustler. Use all the resources available to get, if you have a goal, to build a path to get to that goal. So, these students would tell me, "Okay, well, can you kind of write that out for me? I need a plan." So that's the book. Is I started recording anytime I would speak, I would record and get a transcript of my talk, and I turned that over the course of a few years into a book.
Nice.
Um, and what was cool about it was I initially was gonna publish the book. I had some, offers from ABA and other publishers, but in the end, I wound up self-publishing it. And it's just been this incredible word of mouth success on Amazon.
Wow.
Just incredible. Just I have sales every day to students all over the country, actually all over the world, who benefit from my book, which I just love. It makes me so happy.
Well, A, that's awesome. And so part of the reason I want to bring up the book is I'm trying to get kind of the chronology. Was the book a transitionary thing where it helped you leave where it helped you leave the defense world? What was the chronology of all that?
Yeah, so again, and it's funny if I when I Google myself, and I know I try not to do that too often, but I look back and I see. So even when I was at Jones Day, I was writing articles on this topic. So I wrote articles for Bloomberg and I wrote articles for the ABA law students about how to hustle and how to find fulfillment in your job, which was ironic because I was not fulfilled in my job, right? I was putting on sort of this brave face as this representative of an ideal, but I myself was not living that ideal. But yet I felt a responsibility to give people hope. And really, my book is called The Law Career Playbook. I used to have a blog called Break into Big Law, but I shifted that because I didn't want to sell this idea that everyone is going to be happy in big law. So even if you hustle and you break in, you might be miserable like me. I didn't want to sell that. I felt weird about that, even though I would give these talks. So when I wrote the book, I wanted to broaden it and make it more, look, you got to do the research and build a network so that you find a job that actually suits you so that you're happy, because I still know so many miserable lawyers because they didn't figure out and they didn't do the research when they were law students or when they were coming in to really figure out what this jam is about, what we do. There's so many different things, different kinds of law, different opportunities, and you have this window of time where you can go and network and talk to people and figure that out and actually build out a better and more informed career for yourself, right? So that's what my book is about. So the chronology sort of, it shifted from this break into the big law thing, and then by, I think it was 2019 is when I published the book. When I actually published the book, I was already at the boutique, but I was still working in defense. But the germ and the ideas for the book grew while I was in big law, and it was written while I was in big law.
Okay. So just and by the way, I don't think we introduced your book. The book is to help law students get into big law. Is that fair to say?
No, the book is to help law students find a job they actually like.
Okay.
a legal
I was
job
about
that
to
fits
ask.
them and suits them. So it's the law career playbook.
I see. And so that's something you address, I assume, in the book, which is because this is what happens. And the non-lawyers might not know this, but all the lawyers know this. When you're in law school, there is that hierarchical pressure. What kind of a job are you going to get? Who are you going to work for? Who are you clerk for? Did you have a clerkship for a federal judge, a state judge, this, that? There's a lot of these types of things. And of course, lawyers is, like I said, hierarchical, A type. The pressure is upwards. It's do better, get into the better job, get the higher salary, forget the fact that you can work 120 hours a week, whatever it is.
Well,
Um,
and there's financial pressures too. I mean, I think it's very, very real. And I have a lot of my mentees are first generation, right? No one has even graduated college in some of these families, and they're all on loans. And this concept of, maybe I'll go in big law for 5 years to pay off my loans. That is real, and that is a legit goal to pay off, some of the debt that people are undertaking, right? So, but I know what you're talking about. It's I call it in my book the treadmill. You get to law school and you get on the treadmill, and it's just like you're suddenly forced into this idea of what success is.
mhm.
And if you don't do your own research and make connections and sort of figure it out on your own, you're going to be sold a bill of goods, unfortunately.
Life is weird like that sometimes, right? Like you go into a certain portion or a certain chapter of your life and you're looking in a specific direction. Your neck is like stiff. You won't even turn your eyes. I need to go there. I need to get that job at a medium to large law firm. My initial salary has to be 110K minimum with benefits, blah blah blah. And then later in your life, you look back and you have maybe a change of heart, maybe you view things through a different lens, or maybe experience just molds you. So did you know that you wanted to transition to plaintiff's work? And let me bootstrap onto that. You transitioned directly to Panish, right? You didn't go to some other plaintiff's firm beforehand. Explain. This is
Right.
incredible.
Yeah, well, and the story's kind of crazy too about how it all sort of played out. So I think you will know this, and your lawyer viewers will know this. It is not easy to transition from defense to plaintiff as a senior lawyer. It is not an easy thing to do. And there's pieces of luck I think involved, definitely in my story. But to answer your first question, when did I decide or how did I decide? What happened very specifically to me, because I didn't know. So for all of my book and my education and my speaking about, get out there, learn, download, informational interviews, blah, blah, blah. I truly did not understand the plaintiff's side practice and just how great it is. And maybe I never sort of plugged in and came to realize that. I knew all about big law, I knew all about defense, I knew all about corporate, and even other facets, criminal things like that. But I did not really truly understand. But what happened was at the boutique law firm that I was working at, we actually had some plaintiff cases that were handed to me, and Rachel, go do this. And those are the only cases I liked. I loved those cases. I loved, those complaints, getting in and be able to dig and like tell a story,
Yeah.
right? And to me, it's always going to come back to that, the storytelling aspects of things, and controlling the narrative, right? Not obfuscating and hiding from the narrative. That's really to
Not
me
that
the
defense
huge.
firms ever do that. Mhm.
Oh, never. But no, I mean that is, but I didn't realize until I started doing that kind of work, suddenly it hit me like a cement truck that this is what I need to be doing. Because, if I'm not doing this kind of work, I'm literally crying every morning. And I'm not joking. I was crying every morning. I was so miserable in my work at that point. So yeah, but then it was the question of how do I do this? How do I make this transition? I don't know anyone. I really didn't know anyone on the plaintiff side. I had a couple of friends. And so I put the word out. I had a friend from law school who put the word out, and I interviewed at a couple of small places. Not good fit for me, but I learned things. I learned about how different it is. Comp structure is so different.
Mm.
I didn't know basic things like that. So I started educating myself and just kind of putting the word out into the universe. This is what I need to do. And then one day, one of my friends who happens to work at Panish, Shea, Boyle, Ravipudi, called me and said that Ravipudi, who's the partner that I work with a lot, that he was actually he needed someone with big law experience to help on the fire cases, on the fire litigation. And did she know anyone? And she thought of me immediately. And that's actually a lesson from my book, right? It's like, when you want something really bad, you got to build this sort of internal network of advocates, and she was my internal network of advocate. There was no job posting. This was Rahul just came to a realization, walked into her office, made the request. She picked up the phone, and a lunch was set for the next day.
Wow.
And then he and I, well, it gets crazier. So this was, I want to say this was like February 28th, 2020 or something like that. So Rahul and I go to lunch downtown, and we're chatting, we're sort of talking about, this weird coronavirus thing that's kind of happening, but haha, it'll be fine, whatever, nothing. Yeah, what's that? It's fine. He was planning a trip to India, I think. We just had this really nice chat, and we talked about just all the stuff that was going on at the Panish firm, about my path, the rhino cases, everything. And then a couple of days later, he hired me. And then, of course, the world shut down.
Yeah.
Right. Right after that. I was sort of petrified because I just didn't know. I'd only met him. I hadn't met anyone else at the firm. And suddenly everything's going to be online and on Zoom. And it's really hard to think about now how we're on Zoom all the time, all day long, right? But at that point, I don't even think I'd used Zoom ever. I think I had, used Skype once. But so it's hard to get your mind around. Just my fear at that time was just, am I still hired? Are we going to do this? Like, how is this going to work? But of course it worked out. But it was a crazy sort of hiring story, and how I started there, because I literally didn't meet people in person there for a year.
What was that's interesting. You didn't meet people in person for a year. What was so you're in a plaintiff's firm now. What was the culture shock? What was the oh well, you guys do this differently on your side?
I don't know that there was culture shock. Look, I dove right in I just dove right in head first. And I was working very specifically on our fire litigation, which at that time, just for background, that's all the fires that happened in Ventura and Malibu, and even Northern California. We had those cases as well, but the ones in Ventura and Malibu were still being actively litigated. And so I just, dove right in, and those are cases where you work with many, many other plaintiffs firms as I don't want to say it's a consortium, but really it's you're all litigating these cases together for liability. So you'd get on, for example, a depot, and there'd be like, all these, 90 squares of different
Wow.
attorneys, in those cases. And so I dove right into that world. So I think the shock for me, and I think everyone at that time, was the transition to online everything, right? And just, how do we continue to push these cases forward as plaintiffs, continue to work towards justice for our clients when the courts are shut down, right? When nothing is really happening. And so I dove right into that. So I didn't feel a culture shock. Everything was a shock. Everything was different when that happened. And so I think in a way that kind of helped me with the transition, because it was just crazy time.
Interesting. Okay. And so the book, was that done by the time you transitioned? All right. And has there been addendums to the book since you transitioned?
Thank you for asking that. So, no. So, I published the book in 2019, and I am now actually working on the second edition to
Ah,
be published in 2 months, which will include 3 chapters discussing all of this, right? Because when I published in 2019, I was still a defense attorney. And there was no Zoom networking, none of this stuff that has happened that's been a huge, I think, boon for law students and, college students looking to get into law school. This whole concept where you can network now and talk to people and meet people. You don't have to do 15-minute coffee breaks, right? You don't have to do 1 hour lunches. You can hop on Zoom for 15 minutes, and you have so much more access to meet attorneys and meet people, than you never had before. So there's a whole chapter in there about that specifically, and how that whole landscape has really, blossomed, I think, for law students, to be able to network and make those connections.
what's the overarching framework of your book? What is it? Hi, Mr. or Mrs. Law student, you should be focused on whatever. What is kind of the takeaways generally?
Yeah, so the book is very It's stream of consciousness from my brain
Like,
about how to hustle and get
yeah,
what you want, right?
okay.
So I actually, the way a lot of my mentees and the students that I would talk to, they wanted a practical workbook plan that they could open up and basically let run their life for the period where they're trying to hustle and make these connections. So I wrote it in that way. It starts out, the whole beginning of it is called Get Clear. And the whole purpose of that is like sit down, start journaling, get clear with who you are and what you really want, right? And whichever way that is. And sometimes that involves sort of going outside yourself and learning about the industry, go on LinkedIn, go do informational interviews. But a lot of it is self inspection, right? Like learning, what is it that you like? What is it that you want to do? What is it in your life, in your past that you've been passionate about, that has meaning to you? Start keeping lists and writing that down and connect that to this legal career that you're stepping into, because you can there's something for everyone in this broad profession that we both work in, right?
Hmm.
You guys just got to find it. And it's so the whole beginning of the book is about that. And then it moves into practical steps about how to build that network, how to research on LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn, I think, is the most powerful, most ridiculously powerful tool for many reasons, right? I mean, it's got its outward facing components where you can, say who you are to the world and your accomplishments and whatnot, but it's inward research capabilities are just, there's nothing like it. And the way that you can figure out who's at what firm, who's doing what they're working on, what accomplishments they have, you can really zero in and narrow down. And when you reach out to people, you can do that with specificity. So my book teaches people how to not be cookie cutter and how to really kind of learn what's going on in the industry that they're trying to target, and then how to meet people in that industry in an organic way.
Interesting. And so I'm assuming law students are starved for this kind of thing, right? For this type of guidance.
Yes, there isn't anything like it out there, which is
Mhm.
why, and there still isn't. That's why I feel very compelled to do the second edition, because I thought, well, when I write this, it'll be out there. Other people will, do their own sort of take on it, but there really isn't anything like it. I think that's why it does so well. I've done a few of these, like these podcasts. I've written some articles, and that's how students find out about it, and then they tell their friends, or law school classes administrators find out about it and they tell their students, and it's sort of just gone from there in this word of mouth thing. But yeah, they're starved, and I actually think it's really helped people, which just
Yeah.
makes me so happy.
How long before law schools just make this required reading at some point?
And it's been a class. Well, that's the thing. My book has been a textbook in multiple law school classes around the country, which is incredible. And I taught at USC. So I taught my book at USC as a textbook and a class, a live
That's
class.
awesome.
Yeah, it was great. And I did that for a couple years before the pandemic. The pandemic kind of changed things with that, because it's really hard to teach a networking class on Zoom when, students don't want to turn their cameras on, and, it made the dynamic of it a little bit more difficult. The live classes were great.
This is so you were teaching at USC. Was it the Gould School of Law or just USC general?
Yes, the Gould School of Law, in their LLM program. So I was teaching students from all over the world, how to use my techniques, which was just an incredible experience.
So I am slightly tickled by this, and I must point it out because you mentioned earlier, you went to Southwestern. You kind of implied it's not like a top 10 school in the state or something like that. But I think it's a great school. Some incredible litigators have come out of it. Some very successful people have come out of it. But I get it. Lawyers, we love our rankings.
Snobs.
Yeah, we love our hierarchy and the stats and all that stuff. But it is amusing to me. You graduated from Southwestern, you got the big law job that everyone at Gould Law School wants, and now you're teaching at USC the
Yeah.
students who went to the higher tier law school how to get the job that you got. Just something about that makes me feel very warm and pleasant.
No, for real. And look, I've spoken at all the top law schools, and I've been flown out. I've been flown out to top law schools across the country. I won't name which ones, and spoken to their students. And what I've learned is that these insecurities, it doesn't they're with all of us. They're across the board. And this whole, this idea, this that you feel like you're an impersonator in your life, right? And that you're not good enough. It's kind of built into all of us. And to me, I just feel like that's why I love it. It's like a workbook for life, right? And I know it's limited right now to law students, but I have ideas about eventually doing more because I feel like this kind of approach on a daily basis to our challenges and our feeling less than is just so helpful. And that's something I've learned from talking to students across the board, and I just love it.
What do you have to say to that? What do you have to say from all your experience from defense, big law, going to the Panish's office, writing your book, giving lectures, speaking to students? What is your response to the imposter syndrome?
I mean, look, it's brutal. I don't, and for me, I take imposter because I take everything to such max extremes, right? I take imposter syndrome to a max extreme in my own brain. I mean, I look at it as just I have to deal every day with living with fear, right? Because to me, imposter syndrome is just rooted in fear.
Hmm.
Fear of not being good enough, fear of them finding out. They're
Yeah,
gonna find out. They're gonna
yeah,
find out I'm not right. And really it's how do I every day kind of battle that fear, work through it, get past it, and get a little bit stronger, even if it's just an inch,
yeah,
and for me in this job, this job's so hard, right? Even now in my happy place,
yeah,
doing the work that I love, it's still incredibly challenging, everything that we do, right? And each time I face something and I get through it, I'm just like, oh, okay. But then the next thing happens. Oh God, I can't do this. So I mean that's how I speak to it. It's just little tiny battles sometimes, and sometimes you break through it just by doing the thing.
yeah.
Maybe you're not even successful at it, but you just
Mhm.
do it and it's like, "Okay, I did that. I did that." So, yeah,
What
it's,
about anything like, and I don't mean a Tony Robbins situation, but self-talk, visualizations, meditation, dream boards, or whatever? Anything like that?
yeah, look, meditation, I have a daily routine. Do you have a
Mhm.
daily routine that
I
you
do.
do?
Yes.
Yeah. I figured you would. Um, so yeah, there's certain things I have to do in the morning that I consider them to be medicinal. That if I don't do them, I'm just a wreck for the rest of the day. So one of those things is meditation. I do at least 10 minutes, sometimes 20. And I do
That's
that
a
every day.
20 minutes.
Um, yeah. And I work out. I have to work out. And that has to be 20, and this is people are gonna be like, oh, that's not working out. And again, I don't work out for the normal benefits of working out. I do it for the endorphins and the medicinal qualities, and just the setting myself straight. It's like a clearing of all the madness. So I have to work out, I have to do my meditation, and then yeah, I got to sit down and write every morning I guess it's a sort of a to-do list, but it's a goal list of what needs to get done. So I have to keep that, and I'm looking right here. I just have my scrawling notes every day of what I have to accomplish or what I have to, go up against. So, and that has to happen on a daily basis. If I don't do that, I feel off kilter.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's never quite, I mean, assuming you're ambitious, there's never quite an autopilot, is there? It's one thing. I'm now 39. I'll be 40 next year. When I was entered my 30s, I figured, oh, by the time I'm 40, I'll have life figured out. Everything will be on autopilot. No, it just continues getting more and more complicated. But with the complexities, I think it goes back to something you were saying. You do by just having done the thing, you do develop a stronger sense of self identity, which you can lean on despite the day to day imposter syndromes that no doubt show up in everyone's lives. I really do appreciate your take on this. A lot of what my podcast kind of has become is self help for lawyers, not intentionally. It's just, and this is gonna be a question at the end of this that's gonna come back to that. But the psychology of achievement is interesting to me. And so this brings me to my question for you. Leaving big law, leaving Jones Day. I'm not a big law aficionado. I don't know all the names. I know who Jones Day is, or I shouldn't say who. I know what firm it is. So that's a big step. You were probably getting a nice salary. You're 10 years in. You've passed your stride at that point. people start having conversations. I know becoming partners impossible, but you're in a powerful position that a lot of law students would do things that may or may not be on the right side of the law to accomplish themselves, right? And you left. I'm so curious mentally, what was that like?
So, it was it's funny. I used to have this thought. So at Jones Day, we have, because they're, I don't know, they have so many offices worldwide, like 50, 60, 70, I don't know, a lot of offices. And on the business card of Jones Day, actually every single one of those offices is printed in small type. And it's just a very beautiful business card with
Mm,
showing the power and the REIT, right? And I remember thinking when I was still there, it'll be really hard not to have this attached to my name, right? Not
mm,
to have this sort of marquee accomplishment firm. Like, and then I left, and I honestly, I didn't think about it. Maybe because what happened was the boutique that I went to, the defense boutique, we were like Jones Day Junior. I mean, what made the landing actually somewhat easier for me to that side was we were still working on Jones Day cases, but on the outside. So we would be brought in on these bigger cases as co-counsel, for example.
okay.
That we still had such good relationships with people in that office. They were throwing us bones, right? And we were working. So I was still working on those high caliber cases, right? Cases with meaning, things like that. So I never really felt like somehow I had stepped down or, dropped out. It smoothed the transition for me. And I still, and also I left on such good terms. And I think that's really important. It was hard for me to finally admit that I wasn't going to make partner, that I wasn't gonna thrive in that world. But when I admitted that to myself and I was okay with it, I didn't have an ego about it. I just knew it was the right thing for me, for my mental health, to try to try something else. And everybody there was so supportive. They threw me a big happy hour when I left, and I'm still friends. Actually, people from that firm call and try to refer me cases all the time because they
Nice.
get stuff coming into them all the time, and they think of me. And actually, I post a lot. I do these videos, these reels. It's a big. I love doing the marketing that we get to do as plaintiff attorneys, and
Hmm.
I post those on LinkedIn. And a lot of times those Jones Day former colleagues will reach out, "Oh, I'm so glad you're doing so well." And it's really I'm very much still connected to that world as colleagues, right? And as professionals. So I didn't really have a hard landing from that. It wasn't a difficult transition for me. And then I got to come to the Panish, Shea, Boyle, Ravipudi. So now I'm sort of like, back at the top, so to speak, which is very exciting and I love it.
Yeah, you don't seem like you waste too much time climbing the ladder. You go right to the top. Did you go to Jones Day right out of law school?
I did. I was
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And that's, it was I killed myself to get that job. And that's a big part of my book is how I did that because it was very unconventional.
What did you
How I
do?
was Well, yeah, I mean, what I did was I worked at public counsel, and this was something, I loved working there, right? And I did that out of passion and helping, and I was on the homelessness prevention project, and I made videos even when I was there of the clients, and one of the attorneys that I worked with, because the thing about public counsel is they work with a lot of the big law firms. She noticed me and she saw I was trying to get big law interviews, and I couldn't get an interview. No one came to OCI. No one wanted to see me. I was completely just shut out because I was top 10% in grades, but that's coming from Southwestern. That's unless you're top three persons, you're not going to get those opportunities unless you hustle. So she actually took my resume and, really pushed and advocated that whole thing about the private, advocates who get to know you and know your value. She went behind in back doors and got me that interview. So it
Ah,
was like that, but I laid the groundwork to be able to do that by making those connections. And that's what I always tell law students is there's a way in,
yeah.
but it's not going to be easy. You got to do a lot to get noticed and get known authentically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big I appreciate you saying the authentic part. I didn't have transitions to big law and this and that in terms of my career. Most of the time I was just on my own, but the way I was able to do it on my own was the same. It was connections. I To this day, I don't advertise. To this day, I get more cases than I can handle. And,
It's
but for,
incredible.
yeah,
It's I mean,
it's
what you
nice.
do is, to me, even more incredible than anything I did. Having your own firm and being so successful, and I see your results, I see what you post. You're incredible. Like, you are living the dream, right? So, anyway, just thought I'd say that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Like I said, it's kind of wild where life takes you. I remember earlier in my career, I was getting, because I wasn't making any money in the beginning, and I was getting hourly work, contractual work. But one of the hourly jobs I had was defending workers' compensation depositions, which then spilled into personal injury depositions. At a certain point, I was doing two a day,
Mm,
just back to back deposition defenses. I remember I got home one day after the depots and I was sitting in my car and I was kind of depressed. I was like, this is where my life led to, doing workers' comp depot defenses. And then interestingly, now I am consistently getting phone calls to the point where I actually do this presentation for Loyola Law School and various other bar associations on how to prepare your client for a deposition. I'd say as a result, it's actually one of the strongest parts of my practice. My clients are leak proof during their depositions.
amazing.
Um, and so it's just interesting how, but back to your point, genuine, authentic connections,
Yep,
organic, real connections are so valuable. And you're actually making me think because right now there is something I'm hiring, and I have a post on Indeed and get a bunch of yeah,
yeah,
that type of stuff. Um, but I should be reaching out to my connections more because out there is someone who's one step away from the thing that you need. Just like in your
yep,
case,
yep.
Rahul needed a big law attorney who wanted to work on the fire cases. That's such a easy transition rather than putting your resume in with 100 other resumes at some fair or something
Yeah.
like that. So I sincerely appreciate that you say that. What would you so let's say, and we've been going about an hour, so I appreciate your time. I'll wrap this up, but I wanted to ask you. I know I have friends, some of whom I'm very confident will be watching this, who do not like their jobs at a
Mhm.
corporate law firm. Some are big law, some are not big law, but they're all corporate defense type of stuff. What do you have to say to them?
Exactly what my story was, and I really, and this is something, a chapter in my book. So they should read my book, the new
Hmm.
edition, and,
Buy the book.
and I'll yeah, and I'll let you know so you can let your network know when it's live on Amazon. But really what it is, and I call it the domino effect. You need to just start telling everyone that that is what you want, right? So you tell everyone, I mean, even Uber drivers, like, you never know. You tell everyone you come across that this is your plan and that this is what you want. And, people call this manifesting or, whatever, there's terms for it. But I think there's just a really practical impact when you do that. When you put it out into the world and you talk about it all the time, someone is going to hear it and it's going to resonate and they're going to think of you. And when you talk about it and you talk about why you're doing this, the why of it, why it's important to make this shift, so it's not just, oh, I hate my job and, I just need to do this. But there is always a core reason in your humanity for why you're unhappy in your life's work. Because look, most of our day is spent doing our work, right? And if you're miserable and you don't like it, there's a core human reason for that, right? It doesn't mean you're a bad person. That's something that I learned through all of this. I used to think I was a bad person for hating my big law job because I
Mm,
was so, I should have been grateful to have it. And I was grateful to have it. But, I had this guilt, right? But honestly, now being on the other side and being so happy in my life's work, in my day's work, it's because it just wasn't a good fit. Like, let's just get real. It just wasn't a good fit for Rachel. I'm a storyteller, I'm an advocate, I'm a creative, much better on this side for this, right? So getting in touch with why you're miserable, right? And telling the world about it, telling the world why you want to make this shift, putting it out there. And it will happen. It's the domino effect of communication. Someone's going to hear about it and opportunities are going to rise. Because I know this now in my core from my own experience that once you put it out there, it's going to come back to you and it's going to give. So that's what I would tell everybody, and I'm writing a whole chapter on this, on practical ways to do this, with research, built in on LinkedIn and things like that. So, which I truly believe in, you have to educate yourself too on kind of the world and the practice and what's happening in the area that you're interested in. but all of that working together.
I'm not gonna lie, I am behind on LinkedIn. I don't go on it very much except to find opponents to subpoena them. And I probably should. I probably should. And
Oh,
the
it's incredible.
yeah, the West
Yeah.
Side Bar Association have a stronger presence there. This podcast should have a stronger presence there.
Yep.
It's just not one of those things I've dedicated much time to. But speaking about dedicating time, I do appreciate it, Rachel. Thank you so much for taking an hour out of your Friday to come here and speak with me. Yes, please let me know when your book's out. Besides the fact that I want to read those chapters, I know a few people who I think I'm going to gently suggest it to. So I've appreciated having you on. I always like to let the guest have the last comment before we end.
Oh, sure. No, look, it's been a real pleasure. I mean, I feel like you and I we're doing sort of separate things, but I feel like we're very aligned in the mind. And I love what you're doing with this podcast. And I just think it's great. Keep doing it. And one little suggestion for LinkedIn, you should cut up little clips from these and put them on LinkedIn because it's prioritizing video. So it's going to get more
Interesting.
eyeballs on your stuff. So that's
Yeah.
something I've learned recently. It's even better now, I think, than Instagram Reels. So just little tip for you.
Good idea. I gotta speak to my editor. I've been meaning to make trailers out of these things. Been meaning to do a lot of things. So
Do it.
thanks. I'll add it to the to-do list. But no, you're completely correct. And video sells, right?
Yep. I love it. Yeah, the video is the future. It's the present and the future. So absolutely.
Awesome. Rachel, thank you so much for your time.